This right here is Valkyr, and she recently became extremely busted. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, crazy red crits, crazy setup, seen that 1,000 times before. And I would totally agree. But what if I tell you that the build you're seeing in this gameplay right here is this? Just one mod. And also, her talents are only half baked too. Yes, that's right, Valkyr is melting Steel Path on just one single mod. In fact, I would even go so far to say that she is the single easiest to build frame in the entire game when it comes to Steel Path. And how absolutely broken she gets once we give her a proper build, now that's what we're gonna find out today. So, after a big shout out to all my generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, let's jump right into it. Alright, first of all, what can Valkyr even do that makes her so powerful? Let's find out. Valkyr's passive makes it that you recover 50% faster if being knocked down. This might sound nice, but as we will see, it's gonna be completely irrelevant, so let's forget that this even exists. Her first skill goes by the name Ripline, and what it basically does is it's kind of like a grapple hook where you can shoot it out and pull yourself towards surfaces, or you can shoot it at enemies to pull those enemies towards you. This definitely is fun, but like for 1 minute, and after that you will realize that this skill is completely and utterly goobage. It also has an augment, and this augment too is pretty useless, so just like with the passive, let's forget that this first skill even exists. However, what we shouldn't forget is her second skill. This is Warcry. And this skill is very good for her, because what it does is it gives two things to you as well as teammates in your immediate vicinity. First, it massively increases armor. Second, it reduces the attack speed of nearby enemies. And third, and this is the big one, it massively increases your and your allies' melee attack speed. Keep that one in mind. Skill number 3 goes by the name Paralysis, and what it does is pretty much nothing that we actually want. By default, you spend a bit of energy to shoot out parts of your shields to AoE damage nearby enemies. To be honest, I don't think anyone ever wants to use this skill. However, there is an augment that kind of makes this very interesting. With Prolonged Paralysis, say that 3 times fast, you can actually use this skill to pull enemies towards you. Now, as you might guess, pulling enemies towards you as a melee-themed frame is a good thing, and I would totally agree. However, in my test runs, it kind of felt like this mod is really weird and not quite doing what it promises to do. If you want to group up enemies, then you better go for Magus Anomaly on your operator and use that to pull the enemies in. It has a higher range, it definitely works, and overall I don't see any reason to use Prolonged Paralysis over that. Which leaves us only with number 4, Hysteria, but therefore this one is the big one. Basically, it's the main skill and the whole reason why Valkyr is so busted. What Hysteria does is, Valkyr pulls out her talons, her Wolverine-like claws, and starts attacking enemies with them. These claws are an exalted weapon, just like Excalibur's exalted blade, and can also be modded. We're gonna look into that here in a second. However, what's really interesting with this skill is, as long as Valkyr has her claws out, she is completely, utterly, absolutely untouchable. You can also see that in the top right corner with the gray health and shield bar. And if you now think that sounds too good to be true, then you might kind of be right, because there is a caveat. This skill, just like Exalted Blade, is a channeled ability, which means it will drain energy continuously as you have it on. But with Hysteria, the longer you have it on, the more energy per second it will drain. And that can get quite pricey on the energy wallet after like 30-ish seconds. Also, parts of the damage that you would be taking while you're invincible through these are accumulated, you also see that in the top right corner, and if your energy runs out and Hysteria ends, then all this damage will be unleashed and slapped right into your face. It will hit you like a truck, but as we will see later here in the build section, we're trying to build her in a way that the energy never actually runs out and you can be completely invincible forever while having this on continuously. Hysteria also comes with not just 1, but 2 augment mods, and they are not really good. We're just not going to look at them. Now, So much for her skills. And before we jump into all the modding stuff, I just want to quickly say that it would make me really happy if you could maybe spare a like, because it massively helps out with the YouTube algorithm. I'm not just saying that. So cheers so much for your support. Let's get building. And usually this would be the point where we jump into which mods we want to apply to the Warframe. However, with Valkyr in specific, I think the more clever approach would be to look at her exalted weapons, her claws, her Valkyr talons first. Now, there is quite a lot to unwrap about these. First, if we look into the stats, then we see we have a massive 50% crit chance to work with. However, this kinda comes at a cost because we're only rocking 10% status chance, meaning we're probably not gonna be doing a damage over time build, which we do on pretty much every melee weapon nowadays, but therefore a very crit-focused flat damage approach. But the lack of status is unfortunately not the only problem with the Valkyr talents, because in contrast to many other melee weapons in the game, with this one we cannot use any mods that interact with the combo counter, meaning no blood rush for crit chance and no weeping wounds for status chance. This is unfortunate, however we can still get a lot of power out of these, so let's just jump into it and take a look. Now, first of all, with 50% base crit chance, we definitely go for Sacrificial Steel, which massively boosts this to way over 100%, and that's great. But whoever says crit chance, of course, also needs to say crit damage, and crit damage mods is what we're gonna add next. We go with Organ Shatter, naturally, but also Gladiator Might. Then, the next thing we would naturally do is mod the right element for the faction that we're up against. So, for Grineer, we would go for Corrosive, meaning 1 Toxin and 1 Electricity mod. For Corpus, you would go Pure Toxin, and for Infested, of course, Gas. Then, because Claws naturally have quite the low range, we would go for Reach, or if you have Primed Reach to be able to hit more enemies at once, and then I would personally recommend a Prime Faction mod. This right here would be an example build against Grineer, and you might see that there is still 1 mod slot open. Why is that? Well, don't worry, we are gonna fill this 1 mod slot, however, we're gonna get back to it here in a minute because it makes more sense to talk about this later. You'll soon understand. But before we jump into the Warframe modding, there is one more thing that I want to say, because we can actually use our normal melee weapon to make our Valkyr talons even stronger. Here's what I mean. Since we're gonna deal our melee damage only with the talons anyway, it doesn't really matter which normal melee we bring. However, what does matter is that we can use Gladiator Vice, Gladiator Rush, and Gladiator Might on this melee weapon. These are all mods from the Gladiator set, and as we know, set mods have a set bonus. And the bonus for the Gladiator set would be that for every Gladiator mod that is somewhere in your loadout, doesn't have to be on the same weapon, just on something in your entire loadout, you get 10% more crit chance per combo multiplier. This set effect still applies also to the talents. But now, let's finally look at how to mod Valkyr herself. Now, you might remember a little video from not too long ago where I gave you a detailed step-by-step instruction on what to focus on with each step as you mod a Warframe. So, let's just take that video as an example and look at first survivability, how do we keep Valkyr alive? And this one is actually super simple. We press 4 and that's it. As long as we have the talons on, we are completely invincible, the enemy just cannot do anything against us. So, long story short, we don't need any survival mods at all. The next thing I want to talk about is already at this point the Helminth Subzoom. Now, one quick disclaimer here, even if you don't have access to the Helminth system yet, or you don't have access to that specific skill, it doesn't make a difference. Valkyr is still very strong, and the build that I'm about to show you is still going to be the same unchanged no matter if or if not you use this Helminth skill. However, if you do have it, then, to probably nobody's surprise, Wrathful Advance from Kalervo is probably the best subzoom on Valkyr because it gives us a crazy amount of additional crit chance on top of all the crit that we're already rocking at this point. And now, with that being said, what we need to focus on with our build should be pretty straightforward, and that would be strength and duration. Strength, first of all, pretty easy. The more strength we have, the more crit chance we will get through Wrathful Advance, and the more damage Hysteria will deal. And since Hysteria is a channeled ability, duration and efficiency is kind of the same. Both makes it that it costs less energy per second, and since our goal is to have this one on pretty much all the time, we need to make sure that it doesn't get too costly. So, long story short, strength and duration above everything else it is. And which mods are we going to use for that? Well, let's look into that right now. For the strength, we go with Blind Rage. This one is very strong, costs us a bit of efficiency, but as we'll see, it's not going to be too bad. Then, Transient Fortitude for even more strength, albeit at the cost of a bit of duration. Then, if you like, you can use Power Drift in the Exilus for a little bit more strength, but you don't have to. And then, to compensate the loss of efficiency through Blind Rage and the loss of duration through Transient Fortitude, we go for Prime Continuity that gives us a lot of duration, and Streamline that gives us more efficiency. Now, one very important thing that I need to mention here is use Streamline for efficiency. Never ever use Fleeting Expertise on Valkyr. Why is this? Because while Fleeting Expertise gives us way more efficiency, it also costs us duration. And this is kind of like shooting ourselves in the foot because for Hysteria, duration and efficiency serve the exact same purpose. So while the increase in efficiency is good, the lower ability duration completely offsets that and you don't gain anything. So Streamline for efficiency it is. Next, Valkyr doesn't really have a lot of maximum energy, so we use Flow, or if you have Prime Flow, to fix that. Then, Narrow-Minded to give us even more duration with a fat plus 99% at the cost of some range, but as we pointed out, none of our skills use range anyway, so we don't care about that. And finally, I would strongly recommend the Augment mod Eternal War for Valkyr's 2 Warcry. Now, as we remember, Warcry was the ability that gives us more melee attack speed, therefore the one that we kinda wanna have on all the time. And with this augment mod, it becomes possible to have this one on indefinitely, because what it does is for every enemy that you kill while Warcry is on, the duration of Warcry is gonna be extended by a couple of seconds. Then, in the Aura mod, you're of course as always free to use whatever you like, but since it's a melee frame, I went for Steel Charge, always gonna be nice to have some more additional damage. Let's also quickly look at Arcanes, where I first went for Arcane Fury, which makes it that we get a little bit more melee damage, always nice, and then Molt Augmented that accumulates up to plus 60% ability strength, making everything we just talked about even stronger. This right here would be the full build that I recommend, and just like with the Valkyr Talons, you might see that also here there is still one last mod slot open. So, time to finally talk about this. Why did I leave these mod slots open until now? And just by the way, if you're still watching, there is this subscribe button kind of thingy under the video. You might want to click that to not miss out on future guides. Just saying. But alright, let's solve the mystery of the open mod slots. Now, here's the thing. We just talked about the entire Valkyr build, and you could slap all these mods onto your Valkyr, go into a mission, but what you would realize very quickly after you started is that you will be out of energy, and we need to solve this. Well, with the last update, companions got a massive buff, and there is one companion in the game now that can help Valkyr offset all her weaknesses in terms of energy, and that companion would be the Sentinel Diriga. But why Diriga? Well, because Diriga has access to the skill Arc Coil, with which it can zap nearby enemies with electric shocks. This in and of itself is nothing special yet, however, there's a new mod since the last update, which is called Manifold Bond. What this does is, whenever your Sentinel uses one of their skills, the elements that are on this Sentinel's weapon are all gonna be applied on the enemy that is hit by this skill. In other words, if we, let's say, have a companion weapon on the Sentinel that deals standard impact, puncture, slash damage, and then we also mod viral and heat on it, every time this Sentinel zaps an enemy, it's not only gonna deal its little electricity thing, it's also gonna apply all these 5 different status effects on the zapped enemies. This is huge in terms of status priming. But you might wonder, what does status priming have to do with Valkyr not having energy? If we install the mod Synth Deconstruct on the Sentinel, that makes it that every enemy that was injured by the Sentinel will have a 25% chance of dropping a health orb when that enemy dies. And as you see in the background, This Sentinel zaps a lot of enemies, therefore we will get a lot of health orbs. And now should be the point where all the bells start ringing, because the last open mod slot on Valkyr is going to be filled with Equilibrium. This one makes that whenever you pick up health orbs, you will get energy. In other words, your little Diriga is gonna zap all the enemies around you, then all these enemies will drop you tons of health orbs, and therefore Equilibrium can refill all your energy and keep your Valkyr afloat in terms of energy sustain. This worked perfectly fine in my personal test runs, but it doesn't stop here. As we remember, we also have one last open mod slot on Valkyr's talents. And now that we talked about the whole status priming thing, you might already be able to guess which mod we're gonna use here. Since there are so many different status types applied to the enemies now, we of course are gonna go for Condition Overload for our base melee damage. Beforehand, status priming with Valkyr was always a bit of a problem, because the moment you switch to a secondary weapon to prime status, you lose your invincibility because that only is on as long as you have the claws in your hand. Therefore, Valkyr couldn't really ever prime herself. But now, with Diriga and the Zap, all the enemies are automatically going to be primed for you. That means Condition Overload on Valkyr just became viable. And as you see in the background, it deals a ton of damage. Now, if all of that sounded nice to you and I could convince you that Valkyr is actually pretty busted, that's awesome. But your question now would be, where the heck do you get her from? And that's actually pretty simple. You can just go to the market and buy the main blueprint for the Warframe, and then you get the component blueprints from the LV fight, as well as for Diriga, you also get them from the market. And if you maybe want to step up your game even more and get Valkyr Prime, then you can get a full Valkyr Prime set on Warframe.market for around 75 platinum, so absolutely affordable. As we just saw, it was her companion who allowed Valkyr to be so unbelievably powerful in the first place. And companions can do that not only to her, but also to every other frame in the game. So, if you want to have an in-detail list of the very best companions in the game, then you can't miss out on this video right here. Another big thank you also to Akimbo Fate, Niels V, Lamies, Demon Lord Zell, Disorder Demon, Blind Waffle, and all other generous channel members for all of your support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.